to begin with our special training workshop for the historic town of Pleasantville, covering elected, covering unjudicial and land use matters. It says roll call, but
whatever you want.
yeah, for the last two. Yes, okay. All right, so after that, we're ready for the explanation of the training workshop session 3, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Attorney Shepherd.
Thank you all for coming back again. After hearing me twice, I'm surprised you show up, but I appreciate it. Today's presentation is going to cover quasi-judicial hearings and land use matters, and we've heard it alluded to in both of the prior presentations, but I was going to get into the topic in some depth, and this may be the deepest we go because it permeates everything we do that has to do with land use. It's also going to be helpful on the legislative side to understand what is a legislative matter, even when it doesn't deal with land use, and why it's important. So what we're going to cover is the planning board acting as the LPA. The LPA stands for Land Planning Agency, designated by the town, and it has statutory functions we're going to get into and why it's important. The difference between legislative and quasi-judicial hearings and decisions, we're going to spend some time on that one. The relationship between the comp plan and the LUDC, the Land Use Development Code, we've already talked about that some. We'll go back over it as a refresher. We're going to talk about the characteristics of quasi-judicial decisions. In other words, if you otherwise weren't advised, how you know you were making one versus the other. We're going to talk about ex-parte communication and quasi-judicial bias. We again talked about some of these things previously, but we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on that today. We're going to talk about findings of fact and whether they're a good thing, when you should make them and when you don't need to. And we're going to talk about some best practices. In other words, how to put yourself in the best position going forward to avoid legal trouble and therefore more legal bills, which everyone should be happy with. So, when we talk about the planning board as the LPA, as I said, it's a statutory function. And it stands for the local planning agency, and it's covered by Florida Statute 163-3174. Y'all are always expected to go look that up and memorize it by our next session. But the importance of it is that it is not just something that y'all made up because you wanted it. It's because it's required by law. And what it's supposed to do is it conducts the comprehensive planning program, including with the help of a planner, in this case Ms. Salmieri. And if you had a full-time planner, this is what that person would be doing daily and getting ready for the next planning meeting. They would be preparing stuff so that the planning board is not out here doing it per se, but is having the presentation about what needs to be done and then providing direction and guidance on where it wants to go. So when I say they conduct the planning program, it's through your plan. Okay? And so obviously when it says preparing plan or plan amendment after hearings to be held after public notice, we're not talking about you guys sitting down drafting this stuff. What you're doing is you're getting drafts provided to you through staff when you have a full-time staff or contract staff, and then you are telling them with feedback, like this, don't like that, tweak this, head in that direction. That's the idea. Make recommendations to the town council. Well, the planning board does that frequently anyway regarding adoption of an amendment or plan. Once they get it to a point where they're comfortable with what's on the table and they think it's where the town needs to go, then it comes before you to decide, yeah, we want to keep on going this direction, we like the work they're doing. Or, alternatively, to say, not really happy with that, let's send it back. Let me talk about that one specific thing because it impacts sunshine law. One of the things that I got involved in, you've heard me mention it many times, to the point of you either want to know more about it or you just have to shut up about it. But it's a constant case. And one of the things that happened was a many multifaceted case. But one of the features of it is their local planning board, which was also the local planning agency, had gotten through reviewing the comp plan in a process, which the town was going to go through not too far from now, called the EAR process, the Evaluation and Appraisal Report, which is required every 5 years to be signed. Every 5 years. And when they go through that process, they go through the comp plans front and back. And they decide, with the help of your planner, what needs to be fixed and what doesn't, what needs to be changed and what doesn't, whether the vision is still applicable is a good way to look at it. And so in time, the planning board at that time, also acting as a statutory LPA, send it up to the council after they got through reviewing it. And they spent a long time on it. It's not like they did a simpleton's job. They did a really hard working job. But when it got to council, council said, we're not on the same page. We don't see it the way you see it. And we're sending it back to you for you to work on. You got to go back and do it again. However, here's what happened. Planning board members, listen to this carefully. What happened is that as soon as they send it up to council, they assumed their work was done. And so they then began emailing one another, boy, I'm sure glad that's over, and thinking, we're done with it, so we can talk about it amongst ourselves. And you can't. So once the council found out that was the case, they had no choice, because if they had kept on going the way they were going, planning board members would have gotten in trouble for violating sunshine law. So they couldn't send it back to them, and they couldn't allow them to continue to act as the LPA. They had to take that designation, which you can do legally away from the planning board, and put it on themselves, and they had to go through the process themselves from start to finish to get the product that they wanted to get. Now, you can argue one way or the other as to whether or not they should have deferred to the planning board or shouldn't, but ultimately, it's council decision. And so the important thing to take away from this from a Sunshine perspective is assume things are never over. And that way you'll be safe. If you work on them as a board member, do not talk about it with another board member, even if you think it's over, because it's never over. And we've had examples here, and we'll have them again, I'm sure, as long as I'm here. Okay. Another thing, monitoring and overseeing the effectiveness of the plan year process as what's coming along. As I said, there will be interactions with Ms. Salmieri and back and forth trying to get the town in the direction where it sees needed. Ms. Salmieri will bring to the table what she sees as needed. Clarifications in the code, things that are there, things that aren't there. And you're going to hear some more about some of those things on Thursday. They're going to be reviewing the LUDCs for consistency. And again, while you're free as planning board members to go out and look through the code and see things that bother you and bring them to the table, that usually happens from a staff perspective, saying, here's what I found in processing applications that is problematic, and here's why I think it is, and here's what I think we should do about it. What do you guys think? At the end of the day, it's your decision, but you rely on experts to provide you this information on what's going on, just like the reason I'm standing here today. And there are other tasks, as assigned by town council and your charter, so things like looking at various zoning requests and various other things of that nature. So that's what the planning board, acting as the statutory body of the LPA, does. Now, this is an important one. Legislative is setting policy. So what does that mean? Anytime you're adopting or amending the comprehensive plan, we talked about, remember, that's the Constitution of land use. That is a legislative matter. You can do it or not do it, and it doesn't matter what anybody up here says. You do not have to have a reason. All you have to have is a justification. And it doesn't even have to be stated at the meeting in which the action is taken. They use a recent example of Hungerford. While people stated reasons, they didn't need to. They could literally, as I think Nancy Reagan used to say, just say no. You can. Or just say yes. Now, it's a different political calculation whether that's the smartest thing to do. But the legal thing, you do not have to give a reason for a legislative decision ever. As long as you are literally, and I'm not making this up, as long as you're not on the tape to make that decision, you can make any decision you wish to make. Okay? What else? It includes large and small scale. So those over 50 acres, those under 50 acres are all still legislative. Adopting or amending the land development code. Now that's not passing a zoning ordinance, but it's deciding what the zoning ordinance will contain, what zoning categories will allow uses and what uses they won't allow, what will be permitted and not. Not as applied to a specific property, but as to the code as a whole. That's a legislative decision. All legislative, also known as quasi-legislative decisions in land use practice involve setting policy. You are making the law or the policy. You are not applying it to a given set of circumstances or piece of property. And that's the key difference. If you are having to read the code to figure out what the decision should be, that tells you you're making a quasi-judicial decision. If you're trying to decide what the future is for this particular thing, that's legislative. Okay? the hearing process is different. Well, one of the things is that in a legislative hearing process, which is such as adopting a comp plan or a small scale or large scale amendment to the comp plan, it is a broadly noticed idea. It's posted on the agenda. There's a large, if you do a map amendment, you have to post the entire map in the newspaper. It's got, but we call them super notice requirements, okay? And it's so that those who are interested can come and be heard, and you can hear them. But again, politically this is bad to say, but legally it's accurate. You do not have to listen to them. If I'm a developer telling you all the reasons why you should do this, or I'm the developer's lawyer telling you, you can say, thank you very much, sit down. It's okay. Right? The public hearing can cover all kinds of issues because what are you planning? Your own future in these areas. Okay? It includes consideration of pure preferences. What you like and what you don't, which doesn't happen in a rezoning. Opinions, conjecture, assumptions. We think traffic is going to be this way. We're worried about whether the schools are going to go that way. We think that the business should go over here, but we're not sure where that's the best place for it. All those things can go into making up what is the legislative stuff that you do as a town council. Much different than when you're applying specific provisions of the code to a specific individual. A good way to think about it, if you want to get outside the context of land use, the legislature decides what is and isn't trespass. That's legislative. A court decides whether you trespass by looking at what the law says about it and figuring out whether you did it or not. Okay? And it doesn't matter whether the person being trespassed likes it or doesn't like it, it's what the law is. And it also doesn't matter what the person applying the law, the judge in this case, says about it either. It doesn't matter because they're not making the law, they're applying the law. But if you're legislative, you're making the law.
Hey, question.
Yes, ma'am.
On the newspaper publication, is that geared specifically for the property owners within the 200 feet, whatever range, or is it broad?
Legislative, by definition, is much broader than what you're talking about, because what you're talking about is when you're applying something to a specific piece of property that has a specific property owner, and people within 200 feet are going to be affected by it. So, although it's possible that you can have something that is not quasi-judicial in that context, the 99% chance is what we're talking about is rezoning, a special exception, something like that, and so it's not the broad notice. When you're talking about the comp plan, that's the Constitution. We all have freedom of speech. You want to change freedom of speech? We all got to know.
But if we know now in the world, who reads the newspaper?
You're right about that.
So
It's an anachronistic requirement that I wish would go away because nobody reads it, but it's a requirement. Now, what I will tell you, interestingly enough, you bring this up, I did this seminar for the Florida Clerks Association about years ago now, where they were asking us about online notice, which is supposedly was supposed to be the new thing, and they had just adopted it. And for a lot of the stuff that I'm telling you now, rather than having it posted in the newspaper that nobody subscribes to, it was online noticing where, again, no one would read those online either, but at least it brings you into the electronic age instead of a piece of print. They had that thing in my seminar, which I spent hours preparing and 3 or 4 hours giving to the clerks all over the state of Florida. About 3 months later, they said, we're not going to do online notices. Never mind. They took it away. So whether it'll come back, probably, but to your point, if you're asking, is the idea of putting it in a newspaper kind of silly? Yeah, but it's also the law. In legislative hearing process, the quote presentation of evidence is really not even the right term to call it evidence, but you can. It doesn't matter because you can consider anything. Again, you're making policy, and so it's much different than when you're doing something that's quasi-judicial. You have substantial discretion. You are policymakers when you're acting as in a legislative capacity. And you can take a public or private position ahead of the hearing. This is the case that says that. It's the Isaac Walton case, and I expected it, but if you want to read it, go ahead. It's very exciting for the lawyers. But for the rest of us, it's probably a place to sleep. I will tell you that this stands for the proposition that you can, on legislative issues, have an opinion before you're elected. You can have an opinion before the hearing. You can change your mind. All of of those things are true. And if you think about it in terms of things we've all experienced, have you all heard political stump speeches that say, when I'm elected, this is what I'm going to do? That's legislative. Why can they say that? Because they haven't heard anything. They're just telling what they plan to do. Because it's like, I'm going to set, if I get elected, I'm going to do away with the seatbelt. Or if I get elected, I'm going to do away with the helmet law for motorcyclists because I believe in personal freedom. You can say all that, and then the hearing comes and says, here's why this is a bad idea, all the ring engine. I've already made up my mind. We're doing away with it. It can happen. Legislative decisions. They are subject to the fairly debatable standard of review. And this is a hugely important legal point and support for you to understand why I can say to you with utter confidence, you don't have to have a reason. Because if we could disagree about it, which, trust me, you've been married 38 years, it's amazing what you can disagree with. If you can disagree about it, it's fairly debatable, and unless you got paid to make a decision a certain way, it's also defensible. Okay? There has to be must be a reasonable basis to support the action, and the boundaries on reason are far apart. It's a very deferential legal standard. It means that if you're challenged on a legislative decision and I have to defend you, bet on me. I say it's akin to a bar debate, and we all know what those are. Tastes great, less filling. I think that was Miller Lite's commercial a long time ago. The court may not second guess the wisdom of local government's action. They must affirm if there's any reasonable basis for the decision and there are no constitutional violations. That's the standard. It's the best place to be if you're making a decision that could prove controversial. If you're in the area where that decision is legislative, then you can't touch it. Okay. Applying code and comp plan is quasi-judicial. So all those things we just talked about, when you actually apply them to a specific property and a specific property owner, now you're in the realm of the quasi-judicial. Why do you know this? Because you've got to look at the code to figure out, hey, did they qualify for what it is they're asking? Application of code and or the comp plan to specific properties like we've seen is where this becomes an issue. It's specifically true on zoning, special exceptions, variances and rezonings, that sort of thing. And you cannot create new policies to govern the decision that was otherwise, when those policies are already made through the legislative process. If you made a legislative decision, and then I, in reliance on the decision, come in here and say, well, based on that decision, I should be able to do this. You can't say, well, that was a dumb decision. We're going to change that. Because now's where the rubber meets the road. I'm here. I've got the property. I'm relying on what you did legislatively, and I'm expecting you to apply to me fairly. Okay? You don't get to make it up as you go. Site-specific applications of land development regulations, rezoning, site plans, conditional uses, variances, administrative adjustments, which are sometimes allowed to be done through a planning director, plats, special exceptions, licenses and permits. These are all quasi-judicial. They have standards in your code, although your variances we're going to talk about a little bit. They have standards in your code, which when Ms. Salmieri comes to the podium, speaking to the planning board or to you, and says, here's what I find. The code requires X, Y, and Z. It's usually in the staff report. And they either meet or don't meet these criteria. And then they make a recommendation. When she's here at this podium and she's telling you that stuff, that is competent, substantial evidence. And that you can rely on and take to the bank. And it doesn't mean she's right. God bless her. She may be. It doesn't mean you have to listen to her. But what it does mean is if you don't hear anything contrary to that, what are you going to do when your decision has to be based on evidence? So, when she comes up with her credential and says, I've reviewed your code, here's why it meets the standards, here's how it compares to the comp plan, here's where it meets all the other things that are required. And maybe it doesn't sit right with you. You don't like it. You better be listening for who else comes up here. And it better be evidence that's contrary to a point that matters, not just a point you like, but a point that matters, or you better listen to what the person up here tells you. Because they're your staff, and they have no skin in the game except literally to make sure that you are given the right information as the best of their analysis. Have I seen planners make recommendations I disagree with? 100%. I've been asked in the context of that question, well, I've got people on my board who are, architects, engineers, and they think they know more. You can't supplant, and this is hard to understand, but this is a very important concept. You can't supplant your own knowledge for the person who's standing here. You can use that knowledge to question the person standing here. So if you're an engineer, traffic engineer, let's say, and the information of the planner is, yes, this meets the standards we've looked at, and blah, 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 blah. And you think there was something overlooked, you can use that to essentially, politely, cross-examine your staff. You can say, wait a minute, did you apply this method? Or what time of day did you do the traffic counts? Or, did you look at it on weekends and holidays? Or whatever might be relevant to then determine whether you're still convinced that the person who's here providing the competent special evidence is doing that. That you can do. But what you can't say is, well, I'm an expert on this, and here's my opinion, and here's what we're going to do because of my opinion. Because now, you're not a judge, you become a witness. And you cannot be a witness and be a judge. You've never seen a judge come down off the bench and come out and sit in the witness box and say, I saw this accident happen, and I know it's different. Because then they wouldn't be the judge, right? And that's very, very important, because there's a natural tendency for everybody to want to supplant their own personal experience for the knowledge and expertise of the people they actually hired to do the job. But even if you're right, you're legally wrong, unless you hear it from someone who's not you. Okay? So the key elements, finding the facts. There, key elements. Finding the facts regarding the specific proposal. So in the zoning, are there, here are the things you're supposed to meet if you were making a motion, or you have a suggested motion. It would say something along that we move approval of the rezoning, we find that it meets the criteria, blah, 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 blah. Or based on the evidence and testimony provided, we find that it doesn't meet the specific standards. Specifically, it doesn't meet this standard. It's required to have whatever it's supposed to have. It's supposed to be compatible with the neighborhood. We believe the evidence shows that it's not, or whatever the standards may be for the specific item. Those kinds of findings can be very important to me and to you as a result. Why? Because if you get sued and I have to defend you, I have to tell the other side first in a letter, and then, which is signed off on by her, but approved by me, and I then have to prove to a court that no, you gave the reasons, and here's the reason why, and there's the competent substantial evidence that supports that decision, because it came from our planner. Or it came if you went in favor of somebody, and the neighbors sued, which has happened. Then you'd say, well, no, I listened to the developer's expert. They had a traffic engineer. They had a planner up there. They said this, this, and this. They disagreed with our planner. I believe the developer. It doesn't matter from our standpoint which way you go, but you got to support your decision with evidence. Okay. The exercise of judgment and discretion in applying adopted policies to the specific situation. Okay, so let's talk about that. How could you apply judgment when you are looking at evidence? Well, you can always apply judgment when you're looking at evidence, but it's the limit on that judgment. Like when you cross-examine a witness, if you've seen lots of legal shows, the witness gets up there and testifies with a little confidence about this is the way this person died. And then you hear the cross-examination, oh, really? Well, what time? What food did they eat? When was their last meal? Basically, getting around to the point of there's doubt about whether you really can be sure about what you're saying. That is part of the job of judging the confidence of the evidence. And you can certainly do that, no problem. But again, just remember, if you don't hear evidence that is contrary to what's presented from the podium by your staff, your hands may not be tied, but they're severely restricted. Because I have to be able to defend you based on something that supports your position. And if there was nothing except staff saying it's good, that's going to be a hard day. What is the hearing process? First, notice to the owner and affected persons. That's the question that I got about, well, what about these notices that are going to go to people 200 feet away on either side, or whatever it is? Yeah, that's how this goes. and you give a notice to the owner of the hearing, affected persons get a notice of the hearing, and they are allowed to show up, and they're allowed to present and tell you why they disagree. Now, when they present, should you listen? Oh, yeah, polite. Should you listen to what they have to say? Maybe. Maybe. I'm the neighbor next door. I'm angry. I don't want it. And that's what I tell you. Is any of that evidence? And that's the problem. So what happens frequently is that citizens become unguided missiles. All they know is they don't like something, but they do not know how to defeat it legally. And to give you, as the decision makers, if you agree with them, something that you can use to hang your hat on. So this is important for elected officials and appointed ones as well. You talk to constituents all the time. They will certainly tell you when they're not happy about something. You know that from recent experience. And when they tell you that, if they're not telling you how they're going to oppose it, and they say, what can we do? You have to walk the fine line, right? As a quasi-judicial decision, you're not supposed to be helping either side. But here's things that you can say that are accurate and also won't get you in trouble. If they have a problem with what's coming before you for a quasi-judicial decision, they don't need petitions. They don't need opinions. They need evidence. What does that mean? Go hire a planner. Go hire a property appraiser. Go hire a real estate agent. On whatever, go hire your own traffic engineer. Because you telling me I think there's going to be a traffic problem, unless you happen to be a traffic engineer, in which case, great. But if not, it's meaningless legally. Meaningless, because it's not competent, substantial evidence. So if you want to help your constituents in addressing you and providing something that you can listen to and consider, it has to be evidence. Otherwise, again, here's what happens a lot of times. Things get done wrong, nobody brings a lawsuit, and the anger goes away. So what I'm talking about, and why I'm dwelling with it, is because I know when the chickens come home to roost is when there is a lawsuit. And I know what I can defend, and I know what I can't. And this is what I'm trying to tell you. So the right way to go about it is to encourage people to understand as best they can that opinions, unless they're of educated, experts, whether planners, engineers, whatever the issue might be, is with evidence, not petitions, not I don't like it, not yellow shirts, everybody dressed in the same. Because we get it, you don't like it. That's not going to solve the problem if it meets the code. Evidence will solve the problem.
Let me clarify just a couple of things. The land development code will govern what an applicant is required to provide.
Right.
So if a transportation study is not required in the code for review, that can't be a basis for that decision, correct?
Yes, it's another part of the same issue. Sometimes we get off on red herrings where there's evidence presented, but it's not material to the decision in front of you. If, using a simple example, if the question for you was, did driver A run the red light or not red light, it is irrelevant to me that the person got in an accident 5 years ago. Now that might be evidence. You might have someone say, I was there, I saw it happen. But it has zero to do with the light being red or green. Similarly here, if there is not a traffic study presented, because your code doesn't require a traffic study, and then someone wants to talk about traffic, and I've got evidence that says, unless your code says that's part of the standard, it does not matter. And I think that's the point you're trying to make.
Yeah, and the landscape as well, like some of the things that we've heard in individual applications is the landscape isn't good enough, but if you don't have a landscape standard, even if you come up with evidence that says landscape does reduce greenhouse gas, if you don't require it, you can't enter that as a justification.
Right.
So those are the things that are hard when the code doesn't have it.
And that's
Two
one of the
things you need, right?
you're going to hear, I'm confident, because I got a preview, more about this on Thursday from Ms. Salmieri about things where your code needs some help. So your code can help you. You got to help it first by changing it. Well, it says, I want to go back to this one. Sworn testimony, swear or affirm. Now, if you have been to other city meetings, you might say, well, I've never seen them swear anybody. And if you've been to some of mine, you'll know that we do swear people. Why is that important? It's to emphasize, not only to the people who are in the proceeding, but also to you all and to the planning board, that this is a testimonial situation. This is not feely, touchy, blah, 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 blah. So we've actually sworn in the planners and said, and I think maybe Patrick swore you in that, and said, okay, we want, because again, trying to emphasize the point, this is testimonial. Quasi-judicial means exactly what it says. Quasi means you're not following all the solid rules of evidence and civil procedure, but it doesn't. But it absolutely means it's evidence-based. And so, if I come up here as a planner for the developer, I may want you to put them on the road. So whoever the lawyer may say, put that person on the road. So now you're getting sworn testimony, one way or the other, and that's important. And it's done not only because it emphasizes that it is evidence, but also understands the type of proceeding you're in. The parties can be the city, the applicant, and affected persons. They have the right to call and examine witnesses, just like in a trial. They have a right to introduce exhibits, cross-examine opposing witnesses on any relevant matter, and rebut evidence. So, doesn't that sort of sound like what you see on TV? Well, it is, if it's done correctly. Now, do most hearings go that way? No. Why? Because lay people don't typically feel comfortable or really know how to go about it. But you will absolutely see if somebody is opposed to this project and has expertise, and they are a traffic engineer, or they're a planner, or they are an appraiser, or whatever, if I'm sitting over here and I'm representing the developer and I think they're hurting my case right now, I'm going to ask whoever the chairperson is and say, I'd like permission to ask Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so questions about what they just said. And then you should say, yes, because I have a right to that, and if I don't get it and I lose, that'll be part of my appeal. And then I'm going to ask questions about how they derived that opinion. Did they consider this, that, and the other thing? And it's all about trying to convince you maybe that testimony isn't as strong as it may have sounded initially, just like in any other case. And that's important for you to understand. Are they always going to be successful in convincing you otherwise? No. But they do have a right to do it, and that underscores the nature of a quasi-judicial hearing. Most cases this won't happen, but if it does, it should not throw you for a loop or surprise you, or we don't know how to deal with this, or we've never allowed that before, because this is the way it's supposed to happen. When I say they're allowed to introduce expert reports, if I disagree with what staff says on an issue, here's the report I got from my engineer, blah, 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 blah. Well, next question, is the engineer here? No. Well, it's just a hearsay. Until the engineer said, if this is my report, swears to it, it's not. It's hearsay. Can you accept it? You can. But what we say, because it's quasi-judicial, is for what it's worth. And you may find in that circumstances, not much. You with me? Okay, so that's how that goes. Applicant and affected parties are entitled to more than 3 minutes rule because their rights are uniquely affected. So what does that mean? It's my piece of property, and I'm here before you on a quasi-judicial matter. I should get, in the ordinary course, after the staff has given you their presentation, I should get the first opportunity at the podium and the last. What does that mean? That means staff gets done. Let's suppose they're saying, no, you don't meet the criteria. Now I come to the podium on behalf of my client, and I've got people out here to testify, and I say, well, respectfully, we are okay with this, this, and this, but we disagree with the planner on this issue, and I have testimony that we're going to present to you from this person, and I'm basically on the traffic cop. Then I bring up whoever I'm going to bring up. Here's the appraiser, here's the traffic engineer, here's the planner, blah, 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 and this is why we disagree. Here's some pictures, I'm going to show them on the side, and I make 10 minutes, I might take 30 minutes, whatever I take. Within reason, you need to let me do that. That's part of due process. Now, then I got a bunch of room. Imagine a room, because I've seen this, 500 or 600 people, all of them wanting to hang me. I mean, literally, they're angry about my project. I'm the lawyer. They don't want any part of it. And they get up and they talk and they talk and they talk. And now it's 11 o'clock tonight. And so finally, I've all this stuff, and I haven't been able to say a word. That's the Lord that heals me. But at any rate, I get the next shot to come in and say, okay, here I'm going to try to rebut the things that I can that I heard that are false. You need to give me that opportunity. Not because I said so, but because that's due process. Once that's done, It's shut up, sit down, and y'all start deciding, okay? But not kill them. That's part of the process. They don't have to do any of that, but they're allowed to do all of that, okay? Board is acting as judges. We've been through that part and why that's important. The hearing process continues. Where the evidence conflicts, you have the responsibility of deciding how much weight to accord each piece of evidence. Well, you've heard me say, but I want to repeat it here. 5 witnesses say the light was red, 1 says it was green. You can believe the one who says it's green and ignore the one that says it's red, the 5 that say it's red. They bring 10 planners that say it's completely compliant with everything, but your planner says it's not. You can disregard them and believe yours. Your planner says it's 100% right, their planner says it's 100% or 100% wrong, their planner says 100% right. You can disregard your planner and believe theirs. That's the nature of weighing evidence, just like a judge does. If any of you watched the Murdaugh trials that got all that publicity more recently, then you saw that there was conflicting evidence on a lot of different points. There were a lot of commentators that said, we predict he's going to have a hung jury or he's going to get off. How did that work? 2 life sentences later, I guess he could probably tell you. My point being is that the jury in that case had to figure out who they believed and didn't believe. And there was one expert who said, this is the way this person died, and there had to be 2 shooters, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if you saw any of that stuff. And another person said it was absolutely 1 shooter, and this is how it happened. Well, they obviously believe that one, and they didn't believe the other one. Part of the job. Does it mean you'll always be right? Of course not. Of course not. But you do have the authority and the job. It requires you to be making those kinds of quantitative decisions between evidence you believe and evidence you don't believe, for whatever the reason. Continued hearings, you must be present for or review the complete record or portions missing. Well, what does that mean? Why am I saying that? Well, I don't know how many people are on your planning board. Obviously, you know you got a 5-member council. Suppose that you were in a position where a hearing was continued, and so only 4 of you were at possession 1, but by the second time, by the continuation of the hearing, now you have all 5 of you, but the first one didn't hear all the evidence. If that person can't go back and listen to everything, listen to tape, and commit to do all of that stuff, they shouldn't be in the decision. Because I can't deal with an important potential vote not knowing the evidence that I've already presented in the first hearing. And you don't want to have to go back and present hours additional testimony. So for that reason, it's important that if a hearing that you're involved in is continued and you were there, please be there for the next session. And if similarly, if you weren't there for the first session, then you have to commit to go learn everything for the second session so you're not holding up the school bus. Okay? You got to know everything because it's not fair to whoever. It's not fair to your staff. It's not fair to the applicant that I got someone out there who didn't hear all the evidence, but now they make a decision. So that's an important part of that. Yes, ma'am. Now, does that also
second readings? Does that include first and second?
Well, no, first and second reading, well, it could, because we're talking about rezoning ordinances, so it could. But mostly we're talking about things where the hearing for your planning board is a one-shot deal, and then it sometimes comes to you on a recommendation or whatever. But yes, to your point, where it's the first and second reading, yes. Record keeping is important. Keeping all things, exhibits, and things handed up to the clerk or shown to the board are important because guess what? If I have to defend you, that's what I'm going to be using. Review is on the record. There's no ability to create additional evidence after a decision is made. What does that mean? What that means is, depending on the issue, because some issues will differ based on what your code says, but if the applicant has put all their stuff before a board that has final decision-making authority, like in some cases, and you're going to hear about this on Thursday, I think the Board of Adjustment may have some final decision-making authority, and it says if you don't like the decision of the Board of Adjustment, sue us. We want you to change that agreement because we think there should be appeal to the council before you get dragged into the court, so you at least have an opportunity to see what the Board of Adjustment did. But the reason this is important is because whatever goes in front of the Board of Adjustment, for whatever the issue is, that's the record. You don't get to come to the new council and start a new record and add new evidence and all that stuff because the Board of Adjustment below didn't have the advantage of all that stuff. And so if you think about it in terms of things that you're familiar with, If I had a trial in an actual court and was based on the evidence in front of the jury, the appellate court is not going to review that evidence. They're just going to figure out whether you got the law part right. That's it. You don't get to go to the appellate court and say, oh, let me present some new witnesses. It's not like that. Same here. The board should give due consideration to the professional judgment of your zoning and planning staff. We talked about that, considering their training and experience. But the question of what the code means is a question of law, for which the board must make its own decision as the creator of the law. But who can you consult? Or whoever's sitting in that chair. The job of the legal advisor of the town, if there is an issue of interpretation and you're not sure, because while it's your code, it might have been written 15 years ago. You don't know what was meant, what was intended, and I may or may not be able to determine. But then I have to look at the plain language and try to help you interpret as best I can what it means. But at the end of the day, what that's telling you is you're the decider of what you meant. If you're deciding in a way that I think a judge will not sustain you, I will let you know, but I will never overrule you. I will never tell you, you must do this, but I will give you strong warning, this could be problems if you do. But at the end of the day, that's as much as I can do, because no one, and I can't say this loudly or strongly enough, there's not a single human being in this town who's not up there who ever cast a vote for me. They voted for you guys. My voice is to advise you, it is not to decide for you. Affected parties are, who are they? They are objectors with a standing suit. Somebody mentioned within 200 feet. Basically, if you're on either side of a property that's going forward, you clearly are going to have standing. And you're going to be an affected party. And that means that the same thing that like the developer can do in cross-examining witnesses, so can an affected party. If the developer's witnesses are up here saying a bunch of stuff, and there's affected party here saying, well, I don't believe any of that. I've had my own expert, and I want to ask some questions. Then they get the right as well. Okay? But if you're the average member of the public, meaning you're 10 houses away, but you still don't like it, you don't have those same rights. So it's the applicant, the staff, and whoever's representing the city or the town, and affected parties. Those are the ones that have those expanded rights, not anybody else. A personal, and it's defined this way, a person has a legally recognizable interest which is or will be affected by the action of the zoning authority in question as standing. Okay. You may be shared in common with other members of the community, an entire neighborhood, but not every resident and property owner of a municipality can, as a general rule, have such an interest. Must be a definite interest exceeding the general interest in the community good, shared in common with all citizens. And so, if something across town from me is something that I'm concerned about because it's going to create traffic, I may have a general concern shared by the community, but I don't necessarily have affected party status. It's as if it's outside my front door, and that's where the traffic's going to back up. That's kind of the way it is. Relevant factors: proximity, closeness of the property to the property to be zoned or rezoned, character of the neighborhood, including the existence of common restrictive covenants and setback requirements. What's the type of change that's being proposed? Entitlement to proceed notice. A good idea to know whether you're an affected party is if you got special notice and someone said you're within the 200 feet, chances are high you're an affected party, legally speaking. Burden of proof in quasi-judicial matters. So initially, the burden of proof is on the applicant for rezoning, special exception, conditional use permit, variance, site plan approval, etc., to demonstrate that the application complies with the requirements of the applicable ordinance and that the use sought is consistent with the applicable comprehensive plan. Now, how does this go about happening? Because it doesn't happen in front of you. Initially, it happens with the planner by them providing all the stuff that your application requires. If it requires a traffic study, they provide it. If it requires a site plan, they provide it. If it requires whatever it requires, they first go by staff, and then staff determines whether they agree or disagree and come to their own conclusion, and that's where the staff report comes from. Okay? And the staff report has examined all of those things and concluded in their professional opinion, yep, they're right, no, they're wrong. And here's why. But do you have to stop with staff? We already know the answer to that. No, you don't. If you hear contrary evidence, okay? Burden after the applicant has shown the burden. And for example, if they present stuff to the staff and the staff agrees and presents it, then the burden shifts to the government. Right now, we're talking about you guys, right? To present competent, substantial evidence the application does not meet the applicable criteria under the code, and that maintaining the status quo on the property accomplishes a legitimate public purpose, is not arbitrary, discriminatory, or unreasonable. And why do I say it shifts to the government and you're the government? Because if your staff has supported it, there is nobody else. Unless you have people in your audience who are citizens who brought you that evidence. Which goes back to my point, if you want to help your citizens understand how they can effectively fight against something they don't want, petitions don't matter, shirts don't matter, lay opinions don't matter. Experts do. And that's what they need. And then you can listen to them. Quasi-judicial decisions generally are based on their facts and do not set precedent. And why is this important? Almost every time I get involved in one of these things that's contentious, I get asked by somebody on the council or the board, is this going to set a precedent? By their nature, the fact that one person is guilty of a red light violation and another isn't precedent. It's based on the facts that are presented. Same here. Okay. We can talk a little about variances. A variance may be granted by the Board of Adjustment to deviate from the terms of the Land Development Code. That is where, under certain circumstances, because of certain conditions that exist on a very specific piece of property, there may be something that we can do and they should be able to get to make their property more usable. It does not mean that they are entitled to a variance, and the contrary is almost always the case. And I do really mean it when I say almost always variances are not allowed if you follow the code. A variance shall not be granted to permit or expand the use not permitted generally or by a special exception in the applicable zoning classification. In other words, you're not, just because somebody wants it, and they say, if I don't get what I want, it's a hardship, that's not a hardship. It's not. And this is really important to understand when you are dealing in a small town like this with people that you absolutely know who they are. They may be friends of yours, you may go to church together or whatever. But that's not the legal standard. And so the reason it's important to understand what the legal standard and make sure the community understands the legal standard is because if somebody objects to the decision you make to grant the variance, it's not just the person who gets denied that can sue you. It's also the person who's affected by it who said, no, you should have followed the code. So in order to be on the right side of the law, you have to follow the law.
Gotcha.
Yes.
So just a quick question. I know we talk about variance and quasi and all that. Are there times when stuff may not get to council that has gone through, say, a development or whatever? Is it times that's applicable where staff has the authority or the designation to go ahead and approve something?
There are ways, but yeah, the answer is yes.
Short answer is yes, but even in your code, which is kind of unique,
Yes.
the Board of Zoning Adjustment has the authority to hear, let's say staff and planner says yes or no that you can do something. If an applicant is not happy with that decision, they have the right to go through the Board of Zoning Adjustment to appeal that administrative decision. Not always typical that
No,
that's a
right.
change, but yeah.
There are going to be, over the next weeks and months, recommendations that are come forward to you to make your code more user-friendly for everybody, not just for you guys, but also for the people who come before you to make the case. So that the standards will be clearer, the authorities will be clearer, the appellate rights will be clearer, and there are quite a few goals, and I'll just leave it at that, quite a few. But to your point, there are times, and that's what she's telling you that yeah, there's some level of administrative authority that doesn't come to you if it's agreed to by whoever and they get what they want or they don't, and they just go away. That there is some flexibility, and that's not uncommon. It's called an administrative adjustment. And usually there are some really tight parameters on it. Like, for example, there may be, let's suppose a site plan has been approved with certain kind of improvements on it, but in the approval process, it'll say, like in a PD ordinance, but there can be a 5% administrative variance on whatever it is. You may not have any, but
Yeah.
that's what that's the case.
Your code doesn't allow that. However, there are certain statements in your land development code that are very loose on the planning director being able to decide if it moves to a board to hear it. So I wouldn't recommend continuing that, but there are some things in your land development code that give a planning director a little bit more flexibility, but not when it comes to site plans, only single family residential. So there's a lot of things that are outlined, and then there are elements in your code that say the planning director may, and I think in the past, then the rest of the sentence didn't get read because it says only if these conditions have been met. And some of the things that I've seen, those conditions were not met, but the decision was still made.
So, again, to finish off, there are opportunities for what you're saying to occur. They don't happen frequently in your code, and those may be things that you want, or they may be things that could be engrafted in certain types of ordinances like PDs as conditions. Those are things that can happen. But right now, there's so many things that are in your code that need to be adjusted, let's say, or holes that need to be filled. That is one of them.
Yeah, I think just to be really clear is, we're operating under what your adopted policies are today. And when an application comes through, we have to adhere to that. It also doesn't mean that you can absolutely change all of these policies. So if there are things that are not working, what the difference is changing the policy to allow a project to go through that's already there. So I think that's, so we can absolutely make a ton of changes, but not when an application comes in wanting that.
Right, and I think
I just want to be clear
right,
with that.
and I think that's one of the biggest disconnect that people don't know. Once an application is in the process, we can't go back and say, okay, we want to change it while they're in the middle because they fall up under the rules that were already set when they started the program or the project or whatever.
That's what you heard me mention the last time when I said in the, what did I call it? Yeah, not in the process, but I forget that. I say it all the time, and now it's like that old age disease. In the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the pipeline, which means an application has been filed. When that happens, whatever they are is where they are. Okay, and so that's an important thing to remember, and I think it's the point that you're trying to get at. So, in a variance specifically, here's one of the things that is the most hard to understand by many people, because, and I'm making up the numbers here, but let's suppose there were 7 criteria, and they meet 6. Do they get a variance? No. You've got to meet all 7. All 7. Whatever it is, and if it's 8, 9, whatever it is, you got to meet them all. Now, you have no non-conforming use of neighboring land, structures, or buildings in the same zoning classification, and no permitted use of land, structures, or buildings in other zoning classifications shall be considered grounds for the authorization of a variance. So that's a lot of legal. What does it mean? Let's suppose that right next to you, the person has what's considered a non-conforming use, meaning it used to be legal, it's now not legal, and they're doing it right next to you, and you just want to do the same thing they're doing, and therefore they want a variance. Is that a grounds for a variance? No, because it's non-conforming. You're trying to get rid of whatever that use is, not perpetuate it. And so that is why it's important to understand when someone says, well, my neighbor's doing it, the first question is, well, is that legal? Is your neighbor's use legal? Because it really doesn't matter what they're doing if their use is either non-conforming or currently illegal. It's not precedent for anything, and it's certainly not a basis for granting a variance. Similar with structures and buildings that are out of spec for the current building code, maybe they used a window, 20 years ago that you can't use today, and the applicant says, well, I want to use that kind of window, that's not a basis to say yes. It's a basis, more importantly, to say no, because the code was changed to eliminate that prospect. You just don't go back and apply the code retroactively to that person and make them come up to speed unless certain conditions exist. And then you absolutely can make them come up to the current code. Inconvenience or financial burdens that can be resolved by means other than a variance shall not constitute evidence of unnecessary and undue hardship and shall not alone be considered grounds to justify granting a variance. Well, yeah, I could do that, but it's going to cost me a bunch of money. That's not the standard. Right now, in my little town of Ponce, there are people who are in townhomes, and they were badly damaged in the hurricane, the most recent hurricane that came through
Ian.
Irma, whatever it was.
Ian.
Yeah, the most recent one. And they came in and wanted to get a builder, an owner-builder permit to reconstruct because they don't have to hire a contractor. So the building inspector said, well, let's look at that, and found that the building code said that if you're in a building with 3 or more units, you don't get to pull an owner-builder permit. And this particular applicant, among others, was in a building that had 4 units. Now, I don't know why the legislature made this rule. I don't care. You may even consider it a dumb rule. But the bottom line is, if you're 3 or more units, you got to get a contractor who's licensed, which costs money. And the person wants to get a variance from this requirement. You don't get to vary that. That's not a variance criteria. It's the code says you have to get a contractor. You have to get a contractor, and no, we don't grant variances for that. State and/or federal laws or requirements may not be varied by the town, and that's consistent with what I just told you. If it's the law, you don't vary the law. You don't have authority to vary the state building code or federal law. Variance applicants must prove that the variance is in fact a variance as set forth within the article and within the province of the Board of Adjustment upon the opinion of the town attorney. This is where I get to weigh in and at least tell you whether they're in the right place and asking for the right thing. Not whether they should get it, but whether they are asking for the right thing. The special conditions and circumstances exist that are peculiar to the land, structure, or building involved, and which are not applicable to other land, structures, or buildings in the same zoning district. So something that's utterly unique to that property that makes it stand out as something that is needing of relief. And that the special conditions and circumstances do not result from the actions of the applicant. They didn't create the problem. Critically important, because a lot of problems are self-inflicted. They position the garage on the property in such a way that now that they want to build a pool years later, they want a variance for it. But who put the garage in? Etc. And that granting the requested variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied by this article to other lands, buildings, or structures in the same zoning district. So it's not about special privilege. Now, I want to go through all these. I'm also trying to make sure I leave enough time for questions, and it's already 6:59, and I promised I would have us out of here by 7:30 to leave you plenty of time for questions, and I still got a bunch of pages to go. So what I will tell you is, your presentations, I assume you all got copies of, right? The standards are there, and again, just remember that all of them apply to every variance. You got to prove all of them, okay? Competent substantial evidence. We've talked about a lot of issues here. This is a concrete example we talked about. It's evidence a reasonable mind would accept as adequate to support a conclusion. Again, what you hear there, and again, is the word evidence, not opinion, unless it's expert opinion. Substantial competent evidence from lay witnesses or residents must be fact-based. If you're a lay witness, but you have a factual recitation based on actual observation as opposed to anecdotal evidence, it's not evidence. But if it's I stood out and I counted, here's my facts. Between this hour of the day and this hour of the day, I observed this kind of cars, and I got pictures and I got things to back it up. Then my lay opinion is supported by factual based evidence and might be might be competent and substantial. I don't have to be an expert to give that kind of evidence, but I have to do my homework. I can't just make it up and say, well, I think it's going to create traffic issues. So subjective preferences such as, I love it or I hate it, they're not fact-based, and that's why petitions don't matter. They don't constitute evidence. Conjecture or assumptions. I know this is going to hurt our property values. Okay, where's your appraiser? Where's your realtor who can say that? Because if it's you, you may be right, but that's not evidence. Specific example is when people talk about it, and this is why I use that one, harm to property value. You'll know there's evidence if. Is there testimony from an appraiser about impacts of a similar project? Is a similar project that you're being cited truly similar? Like if I say, this is why I think it's going to be different here, but and over in Winter Park it's like this, and you go, well, it's just apples to apples. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But the point is, it can't just be pulled out of thin air and say, this is how I know it's going to affect values. You have to look at the things and say, are these two things alike? Or is one apples and one orange? Does the evidence in the record reflect reduced values? Or are you just relying on personal knowledge? Yeah, that's the difference. Don't just tell me it's going to affect my value. Show me how. Give me the evidence. Show me comparable sales, for example, from neighborhoods that are similar, where this thing that you're worried about happened, and the property values were at $350, and now they're at $250. Show me. Don't tell me. That's evidence. Property owners testifying from personal knowledge of appraisals, sales prices, or canceled contracts resulting from similar developments or from pending application should be supported with the documents. If they tell you, I saw an appraisal and it showed this, where's the appraisal? I saw a contract that was canceled. Where's the canceled contract? Show me. Don't tell me. Show me. Again, we talked about finding the facts. Governments do not have to make finding of facts. So why am I sitting up there as the attorney telling you that you should? Because I got to defend you, and I can't defend you without finding the facts. That's why. So you not having to do it doesn't mean it's not the best practice for you to do it when it's necessary, and I will certainly guide you in that when I'm here, and so will anybody else from our office. We all know that. Written finding of facts are a good idea in case of appeal. I've already gone through the reasons. They reduce the possibility of arbitrary and politically motivated rezoning decisions. They are essential to effective strict judicial scrutiny of quasi-judicial decisions, and they ensure mindfulness of consistency with the comp plan and all the other things that we've talked about. And again, I'm trying to get through this to give you more question time. So we're going to talk about next party communication. All right, so the next party communication, it's a fancy Latin term, but what it means is communication that happens outside of the hearing. So whether that's on your street corner, whether it's at a restaurant, or whether it's a social event, if you're talking to someone about a quasi-judicial matter, not a legislative matter, but a quasi-judicial matter about something that's going to come before you, that's an ex-parte communication which must be disclosed before the decision is made. Now, this is really important. A board member meets with an applicant or an opponent without the public present. Why is it important for the disclosure to be made? It is because the people who come to the hearing do not know what happens outside of these walls. So they don't know the questions asked. Remember when I talked about an affected party? Or the developer if you were talking to the neighbors, or the neighbors if you're talking to the developer, or staff, or whatever. If you don't tell us, whichever side of this coin I'm on, I don't know what to inquire of you. Because you may have formed an opinion about traffic that's dead wrong, but I don't know you talk to anybody about traffic because it didn't happen here. And you try to base your decision on that. I'm now denied due process. So the disclosure is critical, not to keep you guys out of trouble, it's so I get a fair shot, whatever I am. An affected party citizen who's opposed or in favor, the applicant, or even staff trying to make sure that they address the concerns that they otherwise wouldn't know about unless you told them. So is it important for you to make the disclosure? Yes. It's important because it allows me to defend you in case someone says you made a biased decision based on stuff that wasn't proper. If you disclose it and nobody questions you about it, that's on them. But if you disclose it, if you don't disclose it, that's on you. All right? And this is a critically important fact to understand. And one of the things that we found is that your code, which badly needs a disclosure provision, does not have one. And I'll get to why that's a critical factor in a minute. So again, go through what are the attributes of ex parte communication. It occurs outside the official hearing. It's usually one-sided, meaning there's only one side talking to you, not the other side. That's why it's unfair and why it has to be disclosed, so that it can be made fair. Does not allow the opportunity of the other side to respond because they're not present. Can be in the form of written, verbal, emails, text, anything that was providing you the information. The format doesn't matter. Here's why the town should adopt an ordinance or disclosure resolution. Under 286.0115, when you have ex parte communications, they are not presumed to be prejudicial to whoever is decided against, the applicant or an interested party, if you make the disclosure I've discussed. And it's made at the beginning of the public meeting pursuant to locally adopted ordinance or resolution. You don't have one. And so, while you still would be heavily encouraged by me to make those disclosures, I can't wrap myself around an ordinance you don't have. I would wrap myself around the fullness of your disclosure and say the ordinance, at least if I had to do this in the interim, should be there, absolutely, Your Honor, but they did make a full disclosure. Everything that they did would have been what was required by the statute. The physical paper shouldn't matter, and some judges will buy that, and other judges say, no, sorry, you should have had the ordinance. But you should have the ordinance. And that's one of the things that we need to do right away, so that you can make this disclosure, make it as full as it needs to be, and then I can rely on that and say, you're okay. Without it, I can still maybe win, but maybe not. So we're going to continue to make disclosures while we get one in place, but we really, really need one. These are the kinds of information you have to disclose. And this is why if you talk to somebody and you're not particularly good with memory, you ought to make notes. Because in a hotly contested issue, like for example, Hungerford was on the quasi-judicial side, that was legislative. If we were on the quasi-judicial side of that, you're going to talk to a lot of people, no doubt. And so you'll need to know the subject matter of the communication, the identity of the person, group, or entity with whom the communication took place. Written communications, being emails, texts, and so forth, should be submitted to the clerk so that it can be made a part of the record and be disclosed at the hearing. We have all these emails here. You're welcome to review them. And in addition, disclose the existence and nature of any investigations, site visits, and expert opinions. So if you've been to the site to see it is a wetland site, or if you've been to look at observed personally traffic, you need to say that. So people know, even if nobody else is involved, but you did that outside of the hearing, just like in my example of the judge, well, I was at the accident scene. That would be relevant information if you're the defendant being tried, right? And so that's why you got to disclose it. Now, bias is an obvious thing that we all think we know, but legally it has a different kind of a meaning, okay? Obviously, predetermined opinion is not susceptible to change, it's bias. But it's not as simple as it may appear legally. But for your purpose, I want you to forget what I just said, right? And I want you to assume it's as simple as you think it is. I have defended cities in which elected officials, and I think I might have mentioned this to you before, but if I didn't, in which officials said broadly, I will never support apartments in this particular project. And that was one example of evidence that was used against them by the developer of bias. He said they made a decision that was not based on evidence, based on bias, was inappropriate. But when I got hold of the case, I was able to go in there and say, but look what actually happened at the hearing, look what actually said, and look what the decision actually was based on. It turned out it wasn't about that, it was about something else. So, unlike certain decisions, while I'll say I am going to have a hard time winning, I can still win those, but that's on me. For your purposes, think of bias the way you would. If you've already made up your mind, you're biased. If you're not going to listen to it, make a change, you're biased. That's not what you need to bring to the table in a quasi-judicial setting. Those participating in quasi-judicial proceedings have a right to expect impartial decision-making on the basis of the evidence presented, not on anything else. Again, the term evidence. Decision makers should not take a position on a quasi-judicial application until each party, the city, the applicant, affected person, has made a presentation, if they choose to, at the hearing. Doing so deprives a party of its constitutionally protected right of fair hearing. And again, this only makes sense, and it makes the best sense if you think of the context of a judicial decision like we all see on TV. If the people who are all in the courtroom, the prosecutor, the defense team, are there and they're making a presentation, but you've got your mind made up when you walk in, and nobody knows who's getting a fair shake now. And so that's where you have to look within and try to avoid that. Board members should not actively involve themselves in efforts to support, proponents, or opponents of a quasi-judicial land development action. So, while it is okay to go listen, like I said, you can make a site visit, you can listen to people. You should not get up there and grab the mic and start saying, I'm with you all. No. No, 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 no. Voting conflict of interest statute allows abstention for quasi-judicial bias. That means if you think you may have a problem, that you may not be able to be fair as you'd like to be, there is a basis for you declaring conflict and not voting. But you have to write down the reason why and file it with the form that goes with the clerk, ultimately stating why you didn't vote. Because otherwise, as you've heard me say, and you also see me, some of you actually add this into the statute, you have to vote on issues where you do not have a conflict. And so, I think I put it here. A member of a municipal government commission who is present at a meeting of any such body which an official decision is to be taken or adopted may not abstain from voting in regard to any such decision. Now, later on it says, unless, with respect to any such member, there appears to be a possible conflict, not that there's an actual one, but that there is a possible one in your mind and you're not sure, it's on the fly, you didn't have time to talk it over with me or call the ethics division and ask, and you just feel uncomfortable. This is the one place where you can get out if you have a conflict. But remember, when you declare it, you have to write it. It's going to go in a report, and it's going to be filed so everybody can see it. So you need to think long and hard whether that's what you want to do, because there can be ramifications. Now, I'm not talking about legal ones now. And I'm delving in a realm that lawyers don't want to be involved in this area. So politics. So once you start disclosing conflicts, and you write them as conflicts, people who are not fans, they'll remember that. Okay, so you don't just want to willy-nilly say, well, I don't like this decision because it's controversial, so I'm going to compare conflict. Because you got to say why. Standard review, unlike in a legislative, which is whether it's fairly debated, is whether or not narrow and limited review by certiorari on 3 issues. That means you all make a decision, they don't like it, and it's quasi-judicial, they get to go to the circuit court and have it reviewed, and here's what the circuit court's going to look like. Whether procedural due process was of course. That means, did they get an opportunity to do those things that I mentioned? Speak their piece, present their evidence, cross-examine witnesses. That's procedural. Did they get notice of the hearing? That's procedural due process. And that's one of the things the court will look at to see whether they got what they needed. Whether the essential requirements of the law were observed. In other words, did you apply the right law? Did you get the law part right? Because in that case, they're not changing the facts, whoever the judges are, or the judge may be. Sometimes it's 3 and sometimes it's 1, depends on the court you're in. But they are able to go back and look and see whether, in their opinion, you got the law part right. And then the last one, whether the decision was supported by, last 3 words, competent, substantial, evidence. And this is written in case after case after case. Note what's not there. Petitions, opinions, feelings, hurt feelings, good feelings, none of it. That's what the decision will be based on. Petitions for writ of certiorari are filed within 30 days of a decision. And that's why there's a lot of time pressure on those decisions to be made, and why if they don't follow in 30 days, 31 is too late. Literally, it's too late. They can do it, at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 31st day, and it'll be tossed out of court. No problem. But there's a lot of pressure on those petitions for certain to be timely. Denials, our denials, if we make them, have to cite the legal authority for the decision, and that's what I meant when I said, if you make a denial on the quasi-judicial, we have to put together a letter, go to the applicant, tell them why they were denied. I can't tell them what I don't know. You don't tell me, I don't know. I have to guess. And sometimes I will guess based on the way the record's developed, but it's very helpful if you can vocalize. Also, so that I can say, for example, councilperson so-and-so, I'm not sure that's something that the code requires. And then you can think, maybe that's not the reason I should do this. Maybe I should go back and, what does the code require? That's me giving you a hint without trying to be mean. Okay? What are the best practices for quasi-judicial decisions? Objective decision maker, it makes sense. Do not prejudge the case, we talked about that. Provide objective decisions based on all the facts and evidence presented. Follow your community's plan and local zoning codes and local land development codes. Base the decision on the information available to you at the meeting, including the staff report, site visit, relevant information presented at the meeting, and public comment. Make the best decision possible based on all the information presented to you. Be an effective board member. Prepare well for the meeting. Read the stuff. You don't have to wait till the meeting to read it. You're actually supposed to read that stuff in advance. Keep the meeting tempo the same from the beginning to end. Don't just speed it up at the end because you're tired. We're all tired. I get that. But you can become unwittingly unfair if you had to rush somebody through because you sat for 2 or 3 hours of public comment and then the developer just wants to come back or the applicant wants to come back and say, God, I have to rebut 2 or 3 hours of comment because you got 3 minutes. That's not fair and it's going to be a problem. Particularly if it goes against that developer. Seek to understand the other's position. In other words, do something that all political bodies struggle with. Communicate with each other. Don't talk over each other. Talk to one another. Why do you feel that way? Why? What did you see that? How do you come to that conclusion? Maybe I missed something. Did you hear some evidence that supports that? Et cetera, et cetera. Draw one another out, but not in a mean way. Because in the end of the day, you should all have the same goal: reaching the right decision. Be civil, obviously that goes without saying. Have a bias for action. In other words, don't just want to kick the can down the road. You should try to get stuff done, explain your rationale, but don't lecture. Make your final action clear to the public so not only you understand it, but people out here understand why you're doing what you're doing. And of course, that's the water. I know. Sound decisions can be made with defensible motions, and usually, in certain situations anyway, we, through the staff, and I need to help what I can, will prepare a motion for you in advance that will have at least some of the bare bones of what you need. You might have to fill in specific findings that you've made along the way, but the basic structure of the motion should be there for you. Ask the applicant if he or she agrees, and this becomes a real tool for you later. Because if you make a decision that they're not going to like, but it's based on something specific that seems irrefuted, they may not agree with you from the podium, but it's okay for you to ask them, and it will never hurt you. If you said, well, Mr. Shepherd, we kind of heard, and even when your expert was questioned, they seemed to indicate that this factor is true and that factor is true. The property values are affected. Do you agree that that's at least what your guy said? And if they agree, that's going to get a lot harder for them to win later. So it's okay to ask, because even if they say, no, I don't agree, that doesn't mean you change your decision, but you may have missed a good opportunity to make your case better. Restate and discuss criteria. Usually those are done for you, laid out for you in your staff report as to what is that either it meets or it doesn't meet. But if you have some of your own, you can add those, as long as they're relevant under the code. Follow the confrontational evidence, not the roar of the crowd. Not an opinion, based on what you've actually heard and decided. Repeat, if there's a gift, I talked about the motion, the gift for that motion provided by staff. If you agree with what the motion is that's provided by staff, you can read that thing right off the page, and that'll be the best way to go. Motions that are different than the staff recommended motion, okay, that's okay, but they need to be code-based. Develop defensible public record based on evidence in the record. Last night at a meeting of your neighbor sister city down the way that I happen to represent, we talked for maybe 15 to 20 minutes on an issue where the only report we had from staff was that the applicant met every criteria. And 20 minutes later, we were still discussing it, and there wasn't one piece of evidence that said that person should have gotten what they applied for. So everybody gets it wrong. They ultimately did the right thing, but it took 20 minutes to do it when there was nobody there. I mean, it's literally staff and the applicant, And nobody. So where was the other evidence going to come from? Not from the diary. Remember, we can't make it up. So it was literally a 5-minute decision that took 25 minutes. Can't be arbitrary. So you don't say, well, it's okay for this one, but not okay for that one. And denials provide a reason. We talked about that already. Conditions for approval. If you're going to add conditions, they got to be relevant and germane based on the tests that I said before. One is, are they rationally related to the impacts of the project, whether that be a traffic impact, a school's impact, parks impact, a recreational impact, and are they roughly proportional? If you need a bigger road, you can't make them pay for the whole road. But you can make them pay for a portion that evidence will show is reasonably impacted in proportion to what other property owners might have to pay. And again, that's what's called the rational nexus test and the rough proportionality test. If you can't just say, and again, when I say this, I'm telling you that I know, including my own clients, people who mess this up all the time. I literally was there a long time ago. What else has successful limitations for anybody? You're listening. When a client said, well, we'd love $1 million for our park fund. And the developer said, okay. But could I have defended that in court? No way. No way. And all I needed to do was sue, and that would have been not a pleasant day. I understand the theory of thought that says, well, you don't know if you don't ask. But I also understand the thought if you ask and they say no, and you use that as a basis to deny them, you're going to have a problem. And worse, under the current law, they can say yes and then not do the thing they promised because essentially they'll say you asked for something that was an unreasonable exaction that was not required by the law, and the only way they were going to get a fair decision out of you was to agree to something with a gun at their heads. And therefore they can now sue you for putting a gun to the heads if you try to collect that money from them. And so it's really, you kind of need to do this analysis. So if you have any questions about any of this stuff, when something's coming before you and you say, hey, I'd like to ask about this, that's what our office is for. You can call me and say, hey, I'm thinking we need this, or we'd like to do this. Does this meet? And then I can go through it. And I can even reach out to the other side and talk about it and kind of work through some of it, get to sand off the rough edges. That's really important to understand. So we're just going to start this again. Okay. So now the question, and if I did it right, I don't have as much as I wanted. I wanted to have at least 15 minutes, and I'm sorry. And I'll stay long, but I knew this was going to be long. And I understand if you guys don't have stuff. I get it, but there's so much ground to cover here, and it's not just here. Most places don't get to cover. They just kind of fly by the seat of the pants. This is how it's supposed to go. Question?
Wow.
So can I just want to add, it is a lot of information. However, you do have the handouts, but also know that anytime you get a staff report, and we're going to talk about Thursday, but anytime something comes before you, absolutely you can ask for direction. Is this quasi-judicial? What things can I ask? In a hearing, you can absolutely ask the attorney or the planner. As the staff person, if you want analysis done prior, it is super helpful to ask for that prior to the hearing so that you do have it in front of you. But there isn't anything that Mr. Trevor's gone over that you have to 100% maintain, but know that there's a basis for all the things that he said you need. And they can always ask.
Oh, yeah.
They can always ask in the process. You don't have to know this going in.
Some of you may remember, if you were of a certain age, the hearings involving a certain former colonel named Oliver North, and he had a lawyer named Brendan Peters or Patterson or something, who famously in front of Congress was interjecting himself, and the congressional members got mad at him and said, "You're not supposed to be doing that." And he said, quote, "I'm not a public planner." Thank you. You got a question about how to proceed? I'm not a product planner. You can ask me, and I will certainly help you. But I'll try and get out of your way. I'm not trying to get in the way of you making decisions, but I will certainly help you if you don't understand where to go next. So,
I can always get a question. And this is just clarification. So if a quasi-judicial matter is coming before the council, and it goes back to being a judge versus witness. So it's better that if I have questions about it, to ask prior to and then get the evidence, or,
If it's a question about procedure, you can certainly ask prior to, and because that's what we're trying to do is have a fair proceeding. If it's a question about how to view the evidence, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be able to much help to you because I'm not supposed to be. My opinion as to the quality or quantity of the evidence is irrelevant. I might believe these three witnesses and you both believe there's one, and that is fine, and I will never tell you no, believe those three. That's not my role. But what I will tell you is if you say, well, I think I'm gonna make a motion to deny, and if I know, because I've sat there and heard that there's literally no evidence, I'll say, well, just make sure when you make a motion, you tell me what the evidence is that you're basing it on, of what criteria they didn't meet. And that should give you pause unless you already know the answer. Because if you can't recite evidence and you just don't like it, then you already are in a place that you know you can't be, which is, I don't like it, that's not the standard.
but I guess my question is more of if I do my own research.
Yes.
I can speak from that research.
Well,
Or
it depends
no.
on what you mean by research.
I'm just aiding. So, for instance, if I say, if you go to the traffic study, if I stand out there in the road and say, well, I counted 15 cars, then that makes me a witness.
Yes, that
right?
exactly makes you a witness.
So then that means that in the quasi-judicial matter, everything presented then has to either, if I have that question prior to the meeting, then I can ask. And what if I want to have that information?
Yeah, well, you could ask whichever side, our side, whoever that would be, their side, whoever that would be, the affected parties, they have their own people. You could say, hey, I saw this when I went out there. How does that fit in with your study? Or so use it, like I said, nobody's asking you to divorce yourself from the knowledge you came in with,
Right.
the knowledge you came in when you walked through. But you can't use it as evidence, but you can use it to ask questions. So
Got it.
using your example, I went out there and I was there at 4 o'clock and I stayed up there until 7 o'clock, which are peak hours for, people coming home from school and work and so forth. And this is what I saw. And so I looked at your study and I looked at those hours and I didn't see them. So why were those not in your study? You're not testifying as a witness. You're saying, I observed something. Can you explain how that fits into your report? And then you give them an opportunity to either give you the information or shoot themselves in the foot. But again, what you can't do is then we go, well, based on my observations, I know that study's wrong. No. But you can ask them to explain things that you observed that they didn't comment. And that's the difference. And there really is a difference between asking a probing question and being the testimony witness. You can't do that either.
So if they can't answer the question, if they say we don't have that information, would that be a basis of denial? Or
It depends on-
continuation? Or
It depends on whether or not, because again, remember that when we went through burden of proof, they have to first prove that they meet all the requirements.
Right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And the question would then go, let's suppose for the sake of discussion, that you have a situation where they present the evidence in advance for the application, all that things to staff, and staff has said, okay, check, yeah, it looks like they meet all the criteria. And you've learned something else. You've actually physically been there. You've seen something that is disturbing to you based on what you're seeing. So then their expert is up here and you say, well, I saw this, and this, and I didn't see any reference. Is there a reason you weren't there for these hours or on this particular day? And how do you explain that? How do you account for that in your study? If you had considered those days and those hours, how would that have changed your study? And if they say then, well, it wouldn't have, then you can have Ms. Elmary, or whoever happens to be the senator, come back and go, okay, based on my questions to Mr. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so, that based on those things, does that affect your view of that evidence? And that sometimes staff would say, well, yeah, I didn't have any information on that. And yes, that based on that information, if it's accurate, I can't say that their traffic study complies with what we need or has enough or whatever. And so on that basis, we need to send it back to the drawing board or whatever. But it's a fine line between testifying and questioning.
Okay. Thank you.
That's I don't know. That's correct. She said yes, the answer.
Yeah, well, 7:30, so, can,
That's up to you guys.
okay, is it just one? Yes, what word?
I want to piggyback off what she said. If I should come to the mic, so we can get it on. Hello, everyone. Towns. I'm Tiffany
provide testimony, which all of this stuff is, and it's fact-based, you present it in such a way as you shown to. On this day or these dates, from this hour to this hour, I observed this amount of traffic counts, and I took tally. And here's my tally sheet, and my initials certifying that that's what I saw. I also took pictures when the traffic was backed up at this particular intersection. And here's the pictures that I like to enter into evidence. So now, it's not just you saying traffic sucks. It's you saying this period to this period, this is what I saw, and here's the evidence that I saw. I tallied, I did check marks all the way down, This is what I saw as a traffic count. Here are the pictures to show you what I'm seeing. Here's where it's backed up at the intersection. There needs to be a light, stop, whatever it is might be. So you're presenting it as generally traffic was bad. No, here is what I saw. And then with that information, the mayor or any member of council can then say, well, that's interesting. So, Mr. Traffic Engineer or Ms. Traffic Engineer or Ms. Planner, does that information affect blah, blah, blah? And maybe the answer would be, well, yes, it actually could. Or, the reason that was irrelevant is because that was a special event day. What this didn't say was there was a football game or there was a festival or whatever else, and that's a special circumstance. It doesn't happen once in a blue. Who knows? I don't know how it would be analyzed, but that's how you present it as factual, not opinion.
Thank you. All right, with that,
Yeah, the only other clarification that I want to keep just saying over and over again, if your plan does not require a transportation study to be done, that cannot be part of that reason to deny. Because if it's not a requirement, you can't use that as justification for denial. So those are
Well, that's
questions
another
that
thing.
If it's a landscape issue, if it's a lighting issue.
Or this is going to overrun our parks. Well, where does it say that's relevant to the decision? So, and some of those things should be, but they're not currently, which is why we need to make some adjustments.
all right, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All
I
right,
will not see you Thursday, but Patrick will be here.
all right. Thank you very much. Thank everyone for coming out. I think with that, we'll go. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
So moved.
Smooth, second. It's been moved in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned. What, about 5 minutes? 3 minutes? 5 minutes.
How you doing, sir? It was good. I was on the country, so it was good. Went to a wedding, so that's all I missed. You know, the bishop on Sunday. I seen some of the clips.
He took my roof off, man. That's something I gotta rebuild. Actually, went by and saw y'all. I got a chance to walk through. That's amazing.
It's a big project. I always see it. I'm project managing it, so it's going pretty good, though.
You know, if I can.
Okay, definitely will.
I told him the same thing. I already know how they practice. But that's good stuff. That's really cool. That's a nice piece of property. You got a lot of stuff.
I think it's going to truly benefit the whole community.
I see that. You can now, right? Stick around.
How you doing, Mr. Williams? Good seeing you, Mr. Williams.
Hey.
Uh-oh. You don't broke it. It's yours now. You can take it home. Man, I love it. I love it. Thank you, bro. You think so? No, there you go. Right.
But if it's specific to the well, because there's a code that they're trying
And
to
I think we got to be careful as well. Us going to check it because we're not experts. So it don't matter if we go out and check it, like going out and counting those cards. If you're not certified as a card counter, then you just say evidence, but you're not certified saying that I count a card and this and that. You see what I mean? Yeah.
Excuse me, I need to. I'm so sorry. I need to.
Read, we'll talk.
Just let me sit down. I can stop it because it's still live.